tithing earns salvation. It's always a gift of grace. But to live in grace is another thing. He told me everything I ever did. Can this be the Christ? Why? Because when he comes, he will tell us everything. Everything. The meaning of life, the universe, and everything. Yeah, it's not 42. Last night, after Vespers, we talked a little bit about the gospel today. And how difficult it would be to imagine what it would be like to have had 5 husbands. This woman came to the well at noon, which almost certainly means she came and nobody else would be there. And she came alone. She had no servants to fetch the water for her. What is it that someone who's had 5 husbands, 5 ex-husbands, is thirsty for? This is a very difficult question to answer. That's a lot of loneliness. Perhaps more than we can really understand, and certainly more than we can bear ourselves. It's a very lonely person. And there's some significant teaching in this gospel because particularly Jesus is not crossing over the Transjordan and avoiding Samaritan territory. He's blasting right in. And he sits down at Jacob's well in the middle of the day. And everybody knows who goes to the well in the middle of the day. There's no time for gossip. It's hot, and you're alone. The woman shows up, and Jesus says to her immediately, "Give me a drink." And what it actually says in the Greek is, "How is it that you, Jew, are talking to me, a Samaritan woman?" There's no definite article. And you see it in the bulletin. I've highlighted all the little things that she calls Jesus, and there's an important progression. Those who think nothing of Jesus simply call him a Jew. The next thing she calls him is Sir. Not just Jew. Sir. You don't have anything to draw with. Sir. Give me some of this water. Sir. I perceive. And now no longer sir, no longer a nice man, no longer a good teacher, no longer a wonderful philosopher. Now I perceive you are a prophet. And Jesus says what to him? Go call your husband. And come here. And now it's Messiah. And then Christ. And then finally, the very bottom, the Savior of the world. The people of Samaria, not because of her testimony, but because they saw for themselves Jesus Christ, now refer to Jesus as the Savior of the world. The Gospel of John has 21 chapters. Please note how early in the Gospel this is. This is early on. You constantly have people referring to Jesus as the Son of God, the King of Israel, the Savior of the world, long before his passion, and long before his disciples really catch on very much. In this case, they show up and they're behind the signs. They say, "Rabbi, have a bite to eat." Remember what Jesus says to her just before she leaves and just as the apostles arrive. "I who am talking to you am he." And what does she do? She leaves the jar and runs straight into the city. Now, we didn't get the whole context. We didn't get the whole conversation. Because what did she tell them? "He told me I was married 5 times. Oh, good heavens. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows you're on your 6th guy. Potini, enough. "He told me everything I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" Why? Because when he comes, he will tell us everything. Everything. The meaning of life, the universe, and everything. Yeah, it's not 42. Here's a woman who has given up hope. Given up hope of being happy, given up hope of not being lonely, given up hope of not being considered somebody else's cast off of a cast off. But instead, this woman in many ways represents all Gentiles. I mean, look, she's the world. She is it. Beaten, hungry, thirsty, alone, trodden down, and bereft of hope. And meeting Christ in the heat of the day, she comes to bring others to the fullness of the faith. Now, Jesus' response to his disciples is also particularly telling. They say, Rabbi, I have something to eat. He says, I've got food of which you do not know. Did anybody give him something to eat? And then he goes into this whole thing about doing the will of the Father and accomplishing his work. This is important. To accomplish the work of the Father is to give glory to the Father. It's to glorify Jesus Christ. And what is that will? That people should have faith and be saved. Why? Because they deserve it? A couple weeks ago, I mentioned, and I'm just serious, the best things we do for God to Him are filthy, dirty, trash. It doesn't mean that He doesn't love us. It's just, there's nothing you can do that makes it worthwhile. Nothing earns salvation. It's always a gift of grace. But to live in grace is another thing. This is an important thing for us, to have faith and not to lose our grace. To live the life of a Christian disciple, to live this life of grace. It's interesting, the woman comes to the well. Again, the theme of water in all the post-Paschal Sundays. She comes to draw water, and what does she meet? The living fountain of life. You only drink water because it refreshes and keeps us alive. But as Jesus says, man does not live by bread alone, man does not live by water alone, but by every word which proceeds from the mouth of God. And Christ himself is the eternal Word. He's the source of every life. She came for a little water. She met an ocean of mercy. She didn't lament her state. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for a nice place or a husband who would love her and adore her and treat her right. What did she do? She just ran into town. She just ran into town and said, I think I've met the Christ. I really think this is the guy. Can this be him? That's the question. Tell me if this is him. Doesn't it sound like him? He's telling us everything. To be told everything in your life is kind of a scary thing for us. I'm not sure I want to know all my sins. I'm not sure I can bear it. I'm not sure it would not lead me to complete despair. This woman did not despair. She lived in despair. But instead, she was given hope and joy. This is the one. And brethren, our faith in Jesus Christ is precisely the same. Jesus is not a childhood fairy tale. And in spite of it seems like every 10 years, every 15 or 20 years, and for those who've been around a long time, you've heard this before, we don't know that Jesus even existed. This sort of thing comes and goes at all times. Because it's very difficult to come to grips with the reality of a man who was God in the flesh, not a demigod, not kind of God, not a bottle for God, not the illusion of a person, God in disguise. God in flesh and blood and bone and soul, with a human mind, a human spirit, human will, and a human soul. It's very disturbing. It's very disturbing when you've got a little system that works out just fine for your philosophy. Because Jesus is the exploder of philosophies and the destroyer of all systems. Our life is about faith in the risen Christ, about resurrection.